Hey guys, it's Marshall Mathers IV here, back to you with another video. I decided to make two videos today because not only my first video was shorter than my usual videos, but also because my previous video to this one is about when I really wish and do believe Eminem should have released his 8 Mile movie soundtrack album, which I wish would have came out on October 27 in the year 2000, when he would have only been 28 years old. And obviously, soon after releasing his 8 Mile movie soundtrack album, he released his 8 Mile movie, which was his first debut film role that he was in, and sadly and unfortunately only one. And before he released his 8 Mile movie, he released his 8 Mile movie soundtrack album just like 4 days before releasing his 8 Mile movie. So this will be a video to go with that previous video, and this video will be about when I personally wish and do believe that Eminem should have released his 8 Mile movie. And the day, month, and especially year that I really wish and do believe Eminem should have released his 8 Mile movie would have been October 31 in the year 2000, when he would have only been 28 years old, instead of November 2 of 2002, when he was 30 years old, which is when it actually did come out in reality. And the reason why I would have much rather preferred his 8 Mile movie to have came out and have been released on October 31 in the year 2000, when Eminem would have only been 28 years old, is because that movie of his is supposed to be about the time when Eminem was an underground battle rapper. But the time that he was an underground battle rapper was in the 90s, when he was in his 20s. So during the time he was a battle rapper, an underground battle rapper to be exact, he was really young. He was in his early 20s. Well, his early to mid 20s to be exact. And knowing that during the time that he actually was a underground battle rapper, which again was in his early to mid 20s, which was not only a very long time ago, but also when he was really young and youthful, I think it would have just made much more logical sense and have been way better if that movie of his would have been released when he would have still been in his 20s. Even if it would have been released in his late 20s, it would have been better, in my opinion at least, instead of being released in his early 30s. Because, I mean, again, the argument and point I'm trying to make here is that when he was an underground battle rapper, he was in his early to mid 20s. He was very young. And the movie itself took place in the year 1995. Like, the time period in which his 8 Mile movie is supposed to take place is supposed to be 1995. And I only know this not only because I'm a huge Eminem stan, but also because I have done my own research on this sort of thing. So I know that even when, like, reading a summary of that movie of his, I know for a fact that it's supposed to take place in the year 1995. And in that year, Eminem was only 22 to 23 years old. 22 for most of 1995, and then he turned 23 on October 17 of 1995. So he was really young in the year 1995, in short. And so it would have just made, for that specific reason, much more sense, much more logical sense, that is, if that movie of his would have then came out and have been released while he would have still been in his 20s. And that is why I wish and do believe that Eminem's 8 Mile movie should have been released and have came out on exactly October 31 in the year 2000, when Eminem would have only been 28 years old, instead of when it actually did on November 2, 3, or 4, when he was 30 years old. And also, I would have just loved if that movie of his would have came out in the year 2000 also, because it obviously in that case would have been older and therefore more classic, but also I feel and think that it would have been such a great and perfect movie to kind of start the 2000s era decade off on. Like, even if it wouldn't have came out at the very beginning of the year 2000, as long as it would have came out in the year 2000, which is the main thing that I would have wanted to happen, and is the main thing that I really wish and do believe should have happened, it would have been good enough for me. And I would have been so happy if that had actually happened, because that's what I really wanted to happen. And that is what I personally, myself, in my opinion, would have much rather preferred than what actually did happen instead, unfortunately. And, you know, I think Eminem's 8 Mile movie would have just been such a great and perfect movie to have came out in the year 2000. And it would have been such a great and perfect movie, like I said, to start off the 2000s era, because it would have came out in the year 2000, which would have been the very first year of the 2000s era. So I think it would have been such an epic movie to start off the 2000s era on, such a high note to start off the 2000s era on. And that's what I would have loved. And, you know, another thing that I really wish would have happened with that movie of his is that there would have been either an extended edition or director's cut, especially because of the fact that that's really Eminem's only biggest movie role that he has ever done in his entire acting career, unfortunately, because he turned down so many other movie roles, which he was a total and complete idiot for doing and just a moron. But because of that reason, I think it would have at least been fair if he would have made and released an extended edition of that movie of his, or in other words, a director's cut, if not an extended edition, and have like maybe like a 30-minute extended edition, like with 30 minutes of deleted scenes added to the movie, or even an hour for that matter. I think even that would have been pretty dope, to have an hour extended edition cut of his 8 Mile movie. That's what I would have loved at the very most. That's what I would have expected of him to do for that movie of his. But sadly, he didn't. And unfortunately, the movie director didn't think of doing that either. The guy who actually directed the film. And I really wish he would have. Again, because that's Eminem's really only biggest movie role that he's ever starred in, or played in other words, which really sucks balls. And so the very least that Eminem and that movie director could have done would have been to release an hour-long extended edition of that movie of his. Meaning that, like, add an hour of extended scenes to the 8 Mile movie, so that there would have been like a longer version of it at least, and there would have been more scenes, and there could have been more stories told in that case. And, you know, knowing that Eminem's 8 Mile movie is supposed to take place in the year 1995, and during the time that Eminem was an underground battle rapper when he was in his early to mid 20s, but really it was supposed to be when he was in his early 20s, because if that movie is supposed to take place during the year 1995, which according to the summary or definition, that's what it says online at least, that would have been only when Eminem was 22, 23 years old, so in his early 20s. And 2002 is was 7 years after the year 1995. 7 whole fucking years later after the year 1995, which is bullshit. And that is another reason that I would say why I really wish and do believe Eminem's 8 Mile movie should have came out in the year 2000, because if that had happened instead, 2000 would have at least have been only 5 years after the year 1995 instead of 7 whole fucking years later. It would have only been 5 years after the year 1995, which I feel would have been better, because 5 years would have been a shorter time period after 1995 instead of 2002 being 7 whole years after 1995. And, you know, and again, like I said earlier in this video, it should have came out in the year 2000 also, because that would have been when Eminem would have still been in his 20s. And knowing that the movie is supposed to take place in the year 1995, which would have been when Eminem was only 22, 23 years old, it would have made the most sense for that movie of his to have came out and have been released while he would have still been in his 20s, even if it would have came out in his late 20s, being on October 31 in the year 2000 when he would have been 28 years old, because at least if that had happened, he would have still been in his 20s and not even in his 30s yet. And in the year 2000, that would have been only 5 years after the year 1995 instead of when it actually did come out, which was in November of 2002, which was 7 whole years after the year 1995. So those are all the things that I really wish and do believe should have happened with Eminem's 8 Mile movie instead of what actually did happen, unfortunately. But that's all I wanted to say in today's video. Let me know what you all think in the comments section down below. I'm out.